Angie slammed her school bag on the floor and spun around to face her mother. "Mom, who is the crimson girl?" The question hit the room like a stone dropped into still water. Ada looked up from her phone. Amora paused mid-bite of her evening snack. And Nora, their mother, who had been calmly folding laundry at the far end of the sitting room, stopped. Completely. The blouse in her hands fell to the chair, and she did not pick it up. "Where did you hear that name?" Nora's voice was quiet. Too quiet. Angie shrugged, dropping onto the sofa with the careless ease of a 15-year-old who did not yet understand the weight of certain words. "Girls at school were talking about it. They said she appears to bullies. That she stands outside their windows at night and just stares." She paused, then added with a little laugh, "Amora, you better watch out." Amora threw a pillow at her. But Nora did not laugh. She stood very still, her back half turned to her daughters, and for a long moment the only sound in the room was the low hum of the ceiling fan. Then she walked slowly to the sofa and sat down. Not in her usual brisk, purposeful way. She sat down the way very tired people do, as though her bones had suddenly remembered something they had been carrying for a long time. "Mom." Ada sat up straighter. "Are you okay?" "I didn't just hear that story," Nora said softly, almost to herself. Then she looked up and met each of her daughters' eyes, one by one. "I was there when it began." The pillow fight stopped. The phones went down. Even Angie, who had been twisting the drawstring of her hoodie between her fingers, went completely still. Outside, the evening sky had turned the deep bruised purple that comes just before full dark. No one got up to turn on the lights. And in that dimness, Nora began. 35 years ago, Nora was 14 years old and a student at Greenfield Community College, a sprawling, noisy secondary school on the outskirts of the city where the classes were too large, the teachers too overworked, and the students largely left to govern themselves in the spaces between lessons. That was where she met Grace. Grace was the kind of girl people overlooked, not because she was unpleasant, but because she was quiet in a world that only noticed the loud. She sat in the second row, drew tiny intricate sketches in the margins of her notebooks, and wore pink every single day, pink skirt, pink ribbon, pink rubber on her pencil. It was not a fashion statement. It was simply who she was. She had told Nora once, early in their friendship, that her mother had said pink was the color of surviving. Nora had not understood what that meant then. She understood it now. They had become friends the way you do at that age, thrown together by a seating arrangement and held together by shared lunches and whispered jokes. Grace was not Nora's loudest friend, or her most exciting one, but she was the most genuine. When Grace asked how you were, she actually waited for the answer. But Greenfield was not kind to quiet, genuine girls who wore pink every day and kept to themselves. It started with Tund. Tund was 15, broad-shouldered, and had the particular cruelty of someone who had learned early that making others small made him feel large. He sat at the back of the class and held court there, with Busy and Kemi flanking him like lieutenants. Busy was sharp-tongued and quick, she could reduce a person to tears in under a minute and smile while doing it. Kemi was the worst kind of bully, the quiet strategic one, who never raised her voice but always made sure the humiliation landed in front of the largest possible audience. They found Grace in the first week of second term. It began small, the way these things always do. A mocking comment about the pink ribbon. A snicker when Grace answered a question in class. But it escalated with a speed that Nora, even now, found difficult to describe without her chest tightening. Within 2 weeks, Grace's drawings were being torn from her notebook and passed around the class for people to laugh at. Her lunch was knocked off her desk, once, twice, a third time, until she stopped bringing lunch altogether. Girls who had previously been neutral stopped sitting near her, afraid of becoming collateral damage. Boys who had never spoken to her now called her names across the corridor. And every single day, Grace came to school in pink. "Why don't you just change what you wear?" Nora had whispered to her once, desperate, helpless. "Just for a while. Until they get bored." Grace had looked at her with those steady, serious eyes and said, "If I change because of them, then they've already won something from me. And I won't give them anything." Nora had admired her for that. She had also been terrified by it. Because Tund, Busy, and Kemi were not the kind of people who got bored. They were the kind of people who escalated. And Nora, God forgive her, said nothing. Not to a teacher, not to a parent, not to another student. She told herself she was protecting Grace by staying close. She told herself drawing attention would only make it worse. She told herself a lot of things in the dark hours of those nights, lying in bed listening to the sounds of the street outside. But the truth she had spent 35 years running from, was simpler and uglier than all of that. She was afraid. And her fear had made her a coward. And her cowardice had cost Grace everything. Asterisk: if this story is already pulling you in, you are not alone. Make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss stories like this one. Now let's continue. Asterisk. The day everything broke was a Thursday. Greenfield Community College held its annual inter-house sports event every year in the third week of November, and it was the one day the school truly came alive. Students lined the field in their house colors, teachers abandoned their usual severity, and the air smelled of dust and fried snacks from the women who set up their trees outside the school fence. It was supposed to be a good day. For most people, it was. For Grace, it was the last day she was ever truly herself. Nora had been standing near the track with a group of girls from her house when she noticed Busy and Kemi moving through the crowd with a strange, deliberate purpose. They were whispering to each other and glancing toward the far end of the field where Grace sat alone on the concrete edge of a flower bed, her sketchbook open on her lap, unbothered by the noise around her. Pink dress. Pink sandals. Head bent over her drawing like the whole carnival of the afternoon did not concern her. Nora watched Busy and Kemi. Something in her stomach turned. "Hey," she said to no one in particular. "I'll be back." But she did not move. She told herself she was overreacting. She told herself nothing was going to happen in front of this many people. She told herself, and told herself, and told herself, until the moment it was too late to tell herself anything. It happened fast. Tan appeared from behind the technical block carrying a bucket. Later, Nora could never explain why nobody stopped him, perhaps because he moved with such calm confidence that anyone watching assumed he was doing something he had been asked to do. He walked straight up behind Grace, who did not hear him coming over the noise of the crowd, and without a single word he upended the entire bucket over her head. It was red paint. The scream that went up from the surrounding students was not one of horror, not at first. It was laughter. Loud, immediate, cascading laughter that rolled across the field like a wave. Grace lurched to her feet, gasping, the sketchbook tumbling from her lap, her drawing, whatever it had been, instantly destroyed, soaking red. Her pink dress was drenched. Her face was streaked. She stood there, blinking, trembling, arms slightly raised at her sides like she had forgotten what to do with them. And then Busy stepped forward with a piece of cardboard she had been hiding behind her back. Written on it in large black letters were words so cruel that Nora, even now, could not bring herself to repeat them to her daughters. She held it above Grace's head for the crowd to see, and the laughter grew louder and louder until it felt like the sound had a physical weight pressing down on the field. "I couldn't breathe," Nora told her daughters. Her voice had dropped to almost nothing. "I remember thinking, move. Just move. Go to her. But my legs would not walk. I just stood there." Grace turned slowly in the middle of it all, pain dripping from her chin, and her eyes moved through the crowd with a terrible, searching desperation, the look of someone scanning a burning room for the one person who was supposed to help them out. And then her eyes found Nora. They looked at each other across the field. 20, maybe 25 meters between them. An entire world between them. Grace did not cry. She did not shout. She simply looked at Nora with an expression that Nora had never been able to forget in 35 years of trying, not anger, not even betrayal, but something far worse. A quiet, absolute understanding. The look of someone realizing, in real time, that they were completely alone. And Nora looked away. She looked away. "Mom," Amara whispered. Her snack sat untouched on the table beside her. "I looked away," Nora repeated, as though she needed to hear herself say it out loud again. And when I looked back, Grace was already walking off the field. Head down. Alone. Paint still dripping. Nobody followed her. Nobody checked on her. The laughter had already moved on to something else because that is what crowds do, they move on. But Grace did not come back to the field that afternoon. She did not come back to school the next day. Or the day after that. On the third day, Grace's mother came to the school gate. Nora had seen her from the classroom window, a small, thin woman in a yellow blouse, speaking to the vice principal with her hands pressed flat against her thighs the way people do when they are trying very hard to hold themselves together. 2 days later, the local police visited the school. Teachers pulled students aside one by one for questioning. Everyone said they knew nothing. Nora said she knew nothing. Grace was never found. The school held an assembly. The principal spoke about community and vigilance and the importance of speaking up. Tom sat in the front row of that assembly with his arms folded and his face arranged into appropriate solemnity. Busy wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Kemi stared straight ahead. Nora sat in the back row and felt something inside her calcify into a guilt so dense it would never fully dissolve. Weeks passed. The school moved on, because schools, like crowds, always move on. New drummers replaced old ones. Grace's empty seat eventually stopped drawing eyes. Her name was mentioned less and less until it was not mentioned at all. But then the sightings began. Asterisk, this story is far from over, and trust me, the worst is still coming. If you are watching this for the first time, subscribe right now and hit the like button. It genuinely helps more people find stories like this one. Now, do not look away. Busy was the first. It was a Friday night, 3 weeks after Grace disappeared, when Busy's mother burst into the school on a Monday morning demanding to speak to the guidance counselor. Nora heard the story secondhand, then third-hand, then from so many directions that the details eventually settled into something consistent enough to believe. Busy had woken up at precisely 2 in the morning, screaming so hard she lost her voice. When her parents rushed into her room, she was pressed against the headboard of her bed, knees to her chest, pointing at the window. There was nothing there. The window was closed. The curtains were still. But Busy kept saying the same thing, over and over, even as her mother held her and her father checked every corner of the room. She was there. She was standing there. She was just looking at me. She wouldn't stop looking at me. When they asked her who, Busy said only one word. Pink. Within days, Kemi stopped coming to school. No explanation was given, but a girl who lived on her street told anyone who would listen that Kemi had stopped sleeping entirely. That she sat up every night in the chair in the corner of her room with the lights on, refusing to lie down, refusing to close her eyes. That she had begun failing every test and assignment because she could not concentrate on anything except the sound she claimed to hear every night just after midnight, her own name, whispered from somewhere she could never locate. Tom lasted the longest. He came to school for another full month after Grace disappeared, loud and unbothered as ever, making jokes, holding court at the back of the class. And then one morning his desk was simply empty. No goodbye, no explanation. A teacher mentioned offhandedly that his family had relocated. Nobody asked where. People said it was all coincidence, Nora told her daughters. Stress. Guilt. Overactive imaginations. And maybe, that is all it was. But then I saw her. The room was absolutely silent. Outside, a car passed slowly down the street, its headlights briefly sweeping light across the ceiling, and all 3 daughters flinched at the same moment without realizing it. It had been a Tuesday evening, Nora continued. She had stayed late after school to help arrange chairs for a prize-giving ceremony the following day, and by the time she left the school gates the sky was already dark and the streets were mostly empty. She was walking the familiar route home, past the chemist, past the church with the blue gate, down the long straight road that ran behind the market, when she stopped. At the far end of the road, directly beneath the yellow wash of a street lamp, a figure was standing. A girl. Completely still. Facing her. Nora's first thought, she told her daughters, was simply that it was another student walking home. But something, some animal, wordless instinct that lives below the level of thought, made her slow down. Then stop. The figure did not move. Did not shift weight from one foot to the other the way a person waiting casually would. Did not look away. Just stood there, in the yellow light, in what looked from that distance like a deep red dress. My bag slipped off my shoulder, Nora said. I didn't pick it up. I just stood there looking at her and she just stood there looking at me and I knew. I cannot explain to you how I knew. I just knew it was Grace. What did she look like? Angie asked. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. I couldn't see her face clearly from that distance. But her posture, the way she was standing, it wasn't threatening. It wasn't angry. Nora paused. She looked the way she had looked that day on the field. After the paint. After the laughter. After I looked away. She stopped again. She looked devastatingly sad. Nora had run. She snatched her bag from the ground and ran the entire remaining distance home without looking back, and when she got inside she locked the door and sat on the kitchen floor and shook for a long time. She never told her parents. She never told anyone. She saw the crimson girl one more time after that. Then once more. Then once more after that. Always at a distance. Always still. Always watching with that same expression of bottomless, patient sorrow. Not chasing. Not threatening. Just remembering. The night before Ada was born, Nora said, looking at her eldest daughter, she was outside the window of the hospital room. Second floor. I looked up from the bed and she was there, on the other side of the glass, looking in. She turned to Amora. Same with you. Same window, different hospital, same figure in red. She looked at Angie last. And you? Angie swallowed. Why? Why would she come when we were born? I have thought about that for 15 years, Nora said quietly. And the only answer I have is this: she wanted to make sure I understood that my choices did not belong only to me. That everything I carried would find its way to the people I loved most. She leaned forward. Grace did not come to punish me. She came to make sure I never became comfortable enough to forget. Because comfortable people repeat the past. And she had already paid the price for one person's silence. She was not going to let it happen again. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then Ada said, very carefully, Mom. Is that, she stopped. Started again. Is that why you always say what you say? About speaking up. About never walking away when someone is being hurt. Yes, Nora said simply. The candles on the table flickered though there was no wind. Angie turned slowly toward the window. Outside, in the dark, barely visible beyond the reach of the nearest street lamp, something was standing very still. Nora did not turn to look. She had stopped needing to look a long time ago. She just wants to make sure, she said softly, that I haven't forgotten. And in the silence that followed, the deep, full silence of a room where 3 daughters had just inherited their mother's ghost, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody looked away from the window. Because some stories do not end when the telling stops. Some stories simply wait. If this story stayed with you, if it made you feel something, then share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you have not already, drop a comment below telling me what you think happened to Grace, and like the video so more people can find their way here. Every share keeps stories like this alive. Thank you for watching till the very end. And remember, silence is never as safe as it feels.